All I did was ask for a glass of water, and my daughter snapped. "We're not here to serve you," shouting at me while I lay drained and sore in the very home I spent a lifetime building, just days after heart surgery. As a father who had sacrificed everything to secure her future, the sting of that moment cut deeper than any scalpel ever could. They acted as if I had no value, like they could mistreat me without consequence. That's when I spoke the words, "You have 72 hours to move out of this house." You won't believe what followed. Before I go on, please make sure to hit the subscribe button and drop a comment telling us where you're tuning in from. "Can you bring me some water?" I asked, almost unconsciously, even before I had settled into my chair. 3 long days in the hospital had dried me out in ways that went beyond mere thirst. The medical tape across my chest tugged painfully with each inhale, a relentless reminder of what my body had just survived. Haley paused in the kitchen doorway. Her face went from mildly irritated to noticeably colder. "I just got back from the hospital," I added, trying to explain. My voice came out faint, weaker than I intended. The trip home had drained me more than expected, and even small talk now felt like a marathon. She folded her arms. The way she did it, it was precise, like she'd rehearsed it. "We're not your servants." That hit harder than any punch I've ever taken. I kept staring at my daughter, hoping to see some flicker of the little girl who used to pick flowers from the lawn and gift them to me with a smile. But nothing. Her face was unreadable, like I was a random beggar asking for coins outside a store. "I've just come out of surgery," I said slowly. Each word was picked carefully, as if speaking too fast might rip the stitches inside me. "I'm asking for water." Cain didn't bother to look up from the TV. The remote rested on his leg like it was some royal staff of authority. A game show played loudly while my request just floated unanswered in the space between us. "The kitchen's right there." Haley waved vaguely in that direction, her wedding band glinting as sunlight hit it. "You've got legs." I held onto the armrests and tried to push myself up. My chest screamed in pain as the surgical wound protested violently. My sight blurred for a moment, and I had to stop halfway through the motion of standing. It felt like the stitches would tear apart right then and there, leaving me bleeding out on the very carpet I had bought years ago. "Careful, Dad." Haley said it with the kind of empty concern people use when they want to appear kind but don't feel anything. "Don't fall and create more work for us." More work. That's what I was to her now. A chore. I thought of the countless times I'd fetched her water when she had fevers, or sat up beside her during those childhood nights when monsters haunted her dreams. But those memories seemed to belong to a different life. My legs trembled as I started walking toward the kitchen. Every movement jolted my chest, but there was no going back to that chair. Not now. Not after the truth had begun to reveal itself, like ink soaking into white fabric. "This is so over the top," Con finally spoke, not even glancing away from the screen. "It's not like he's dying, just had a basic heart thing." A basic heart thing. I had flatlined twice during the operation. The surgeon explained all the complications, the near misses, the lucky breaks. Yet none of that seemed to land with the two people who should have cared most. The kitchen might have been 10 miles away for all my body knew. Every step required negotiating between sheer willpower and physical weakness. I could hear Haley exhale in annoyance behind me, the same sigh she'd use in bumper-to-bumper traffic or when lines at the checkout were too long. What's next? He'll ask us to cook for him too, she whispered to Con. Don't give him ideas, he said, laughing. The sound was dry, empty, void of warmth. When I finally reached the counter, I grabbed its edge. The coolness grounded me, gave me a moment to absorb what I had just heard. This wasn't just frustration. This wasn't stress talking. This was who they really were, either thinking I couldn't hear them or not caring if I did. The cup shook in my hand as I filled it from the faucet. Same water I'd been drinking for 20 years, but it had never tasted so bitter. Everything looked the same, but I knew things had changed forever. When I turned back, they were watching me with a mix of irritation and thinly veiled contempt. My own daughter looked at me like I was some random, bothersome guest. And that glass, so ordinary yet now heavy with realization, felt like the heaviest thing I'd ever held. Not because of its weight, but because of the truth it confirmed. I had built this home. I had paid for their degrees, for weddings, for car loans. I had given everything, and they couldn't even hand me water. I walked back to my seat with purpose, not just because my body demanded it, but because I needed to think. I needed a plan. I needed to decide what kind of man I wanted to be for however many years I had left. The sunlight from the window angled lower now, casting longer, darker shadows across the room. Somewhere inside those shadows, something new was forming. A new version of me, one that would show them exactly what they lost the moment they treated me like I didn't matter. I sank back into the chair and took another sip. Still bitter, but now it carried something else too, something dangerously close to satisfaction. They had no idea what was coming next. Getting to my room felt like dragging myself across a dry wasteland. Every step reminded me that my body hadn't recovered yet, even though my heart was still technically beating. The hallway felt longer than ever before. I passed by framed photos, snapshots of a family that now felt like strangers. They watched me from the walls with smiles that no longer meant anything. Once inside, I leaned against the door, letting its solidity support me. This bedroom had always been a place of safety. My wife, Sarah, and I had spent years in here dreaming, planning, living. Now it felt like my only safe place from my own blood. Lowering myself to the bed was a challenge. The pain flared up again, sharp and unforgiving, but none of it cut deeper than the memory of my daughter's voice. We're not your servants. I kept replaying it, again and again. This was the same girl whose entire education I paid for without a second thought. I had spent nearly $20,000 on her wedding. I had taken over her husband's car loan when he lost his job last year. I didn't hesitate once. That was what being a father meant to me, always showing up, always covering them when they fell short. That afternoon I lay there, and old memories came flooding in, ones I had tucked away. 5 years ago, after Sarah passed, I sat in this very bed, holding the life insurance payout in my hands. It was enough to buy myself a smaller place and still give them a real start. So I drove to the real estate office, signed over this house to Haley and her husband, Cain. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a yard I'd imagined grandchildren running around in. I can't accept this, Haley had whispered through tears. But I insisted. This is what your mother would have wanted. Family looks after family. Cain had shaken my hand, promising me that I'd always have a place here, that they'd care for me when I got old. That promise evaporated the moment I asked for water. The same house I had built and filled with warmth now felt like a place I no longer belonged. The curtains swayed gently as the sun filtered in, touching the furniture I had once picked out, the very bed I had shared with Sarah. It was all theirs now legally, yet they treated me like a squatter. I thought about the other times I'd helped them. When Kayan's startup collapsed, and I handed over $5,000 to keep them afloat. When Haley wanted a modern kitchen, and the renovation cost $8,000. When their car broke down, and they needed a new one immediately. Every time I just said yes. But somewhere along the line, that yes stopped feeling like a gift to them. It became something expected. That expectation hardened into entitlement. A dull pressure built in my chest, not just surgical pain, but the weight of clarity. How had I not seen it earlier? I wasn't a father to them anymore. I was a bank account, an aging liability, a name on a deed that gave them comfort, not family. I looked at my nightstand. Inside, it was my old address book. Tucked inside were business cards from people I trusted. One of them was from Michael O'Connor, my attorney for years, the one who had handled the deed transfer when I gave them the house. Michael had always advised protections. At the time, I didn't care to understand the fine print. I just wanted to give. But now I wondered what kind of protection those papers might still offer me. My fingers felt steadier than they had in days as I reached for the drawer. It was time to find out. Saturday came with a clarity that only follows a night of tossing and turning, full of hard thoughts and harder decisions. At exactly 8 a.m., I called Michael O'Connor. I apologized for calling on a weekend, but I told him it was urgent, about family and the house. His calm voice was exactly as I remembered from our earlier dealings. Of course, Mr. Richardson. After all you've just gone through, I'll be there by 10. By 9:30, Haley and Kayan left for their usual weekend errands, chatting and shutting doors like it was just another peaceful morning. They had no idea what I had set in motion. Right on time, Michael walked in with his familiar brown leather briefcase, the same one I'd seen in all our past meetings. He wore a charcoal suit, clearly sacrificing his weekend to be here. His handshake was firm and familiar, grounding me in the sea. Realness of what we were about to do. Please sit anywhere, I said, thankful my strength had returned enough to conduct this conversation properly. He settled into the chair across from mine, laying out his files with the confidence of a man who'd done this 100 times. You mentioned concerns regarding the home, he began. Tell me what's going on. I had practiced this explanation in my head the entire night. I needed to explain my concerns without breaking into emotion. I'd like to go over the legal transfer I made to my daughter years ago. Specifically, what rights I might still hold now that things have changed. Michael raised an eyebrow just slightly, but kept his face neutral. The property transfer, was that to Haley? He asked. Yes, about 5 years ago. You handled the paperwork. He sifted through his files with the same methodical calm he always had. Let's take a look at those documents again. In a few moments, our coffee table was covered in paperwork. The title transfer, gift documentation, tax filings. Papers I remembered signing, though I had barely skimmed them at the time, trusting completely in the good intentions of my heart. Then he said it, Words I didn't expect. Actually, Mr. Richardson, the property is still legally yours. I paused. Come again. You didn't sign over full, unconditional ownership, he said, pointing to a paragraph buried in legal jargon. You signed what's called a conditional gift deed with a reversion clause. It's a common clause for family transfers. My pulse quickened, maybe from hope, maybe from disbelief. What exactly does that mean for me now? Michael leaned over and showed me the section. It means that under specific conditions, failure to uphold responsibilities like providing care or maintaining agreed housing, the ownership reverts to the original grantor. In plain terms, I still had legal rights to take the house back. Those safeguards Michael had included, just in case, were no longer footnotes. They were lifelines. How long would it take for this reversal to take effect? I asked. Once we document that there's been a breach in the conditions, it can become effective within 30 days of filing the notice. Everything inside me shifted. The helplessness I had felt just 24 hours earlier gave way to something else. Resolve. What kind of proof do we need? I asked. We'd need clear evidence, behavior, words, anything that shows they failed their end of the agreement. Witnesses help. So does recording their treatment of you. Michael began gathering the documents neatly, though he paused for a moment. Of course, I should remind you, once a case like this starts, it can change family relationships permanently. Out the window, I saw my neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, tending her garden like she always did. For her, it was a normal Saturday. For me, everything had tilted. The house didn't feel like a prison anymore. Knowing I still legally owned it changed everything. Michael's voice brought me back. It all depends on how much evidence you have and how quickly you want to proceed. I looked at him, the papers in front of me and the house around me. I think, I said slowly, that before I file anything, I need to know if the situation can still be salvaged. I need to give them a chance to show me who they are, now that I'm paying attention. Michael nodded, the kind of nod only someone experienced gives. That's fair. Let's talk about how to test that. Later that evening, I heard the familiar slam of car doors and the sound of shopping bags hitting the table. I was in the kitchen, timing my steps just right so they wouldn't suspect a thing. I needed them to reveal themselves naturally. Haley walked in first, arms full of purchases. She dropped her purse, slid off her sunglasses, and kicked off her shoes like nothing had happened. Cain followed, balancing containers of food and a bag of receipts. "How was your day?" I asked, with what I hoped sounded like genuine curiosity. "It was fine," she replied dryly, the same dismissiveness as before. But now I was noting her tone like a court stenographer, collecting verbal evidence for Michael's future file. They made their way to the kitchen. That's when I asked, right as they were settling in, "Could you pour me a glass of water while you're already there?" Haley's hand froze in midair. The look she gave me was one I recognized, annoyance, not concern. "Can't you walk over yourself?" "Perfect." Just as dismissive as yesterday. "I'm still healing," I answered, keeping my voice even. "It'd be a help." Cain didn't even look up. You walked to the kitchen just fine earlier. What's the big deal now? I felt something shift in me. I kept calm on the outside, but inside I was cataloguing every word, every sigh. I was hoping you'd show a little consideration to someone who just had heart surgery. Stop being dramatic, Con muttered. You're not helpless. Don't act like you are. Ray. Haley added without missing a beat. Yeah, you can't expect us to serve you hand and foot just because of one operation. One operation. As if my heart had never stopped beating on the table, as if I hadn't nearly died. I stood up slowly. I made sure they noticed how I held my chest, how careful I had to be. So helping your father is too much to ask. When you can do it yourself, Haley said, her voice sharp and final. Yes. There it was again. Not even a different variation, just the same cutting phrase. We're not your servants. This wasn't miscommunication. This was who they were now, and they weren't even trying to hide it anymore. I turned away and walked back to the sink, filled the glass myself. Their conversation resumed behind me like nothing had happened, her sorting her shopping bags, him sinking into the couch with the remote. The water tasted exactly the same. But this time, the bitterness didn't come from betrayal. This time, it came from justice forming in the background. I now had everything I needed. Did you get everything you were looking for while you were out? I asked, returning to the living room with my glass in hand. Mostly, Haley mumbled, not looking up from the items she was unpacking. I'll probably need to go back next weekend. There's a lamp I want for the bedroom. Our bedroom, the one in the house that legally belonged to me. She spoke so casually, planning purchases with money that wasn't hers, for a space that was never truly theirs to begin with. Every offhand remark, every glance, every assumption about their continued ownership of this home, it was all being stored in my memory. All of it would serve Michael's case. I gave her a thoughtful nod. That sounds reasonable. Cain gave me a sideways look, his eyebrows knitting slightly. You okay? You seem different today. Different, if only he understood how much had changed since yesterday. But I wasn't going to say anything, not yet. Not until all my legal tools were lined up, ready to be used with precision. Just thinking about family, I replied honestly, and what it's supposed to mean. They resumed their routines as if nothing had happened. The TV droned on with a show about strangers competing for prize money, which suddenly felt fitting. I finished my water slowly, deliberately, then placed the empty glass down with quiet intent. I would call Michael again tomorrow. 20 minutes later, I stood in the living room doorway, the weight of the moment heavy in my chest. I need both of you to leave my house, I said, calm and certain. The air changed instantly. You could feel it, the silence before a storm. Haley dropped the magazine she was holding. It hit the coffee table with a soft thump. Cain stopped scrolling through his phone. His face snapped into focus, suddenly alert. What did you just say? Haley's tone held an edge I hadn't heard from her before. This is my house, I said, every syllable deliberate. I'm asking you to gather your things and find a new place to stay. Cain slowly rose to his feet, using his height as a form of pressure. You're not serious. This is our home. No, I answered evenly. It's mine. I gave it to you as a gift, but that gift came with expectations, ones you've broken. Haley jumped up, her cheeks flushing with disbelief and panic. You can't just throw us out. We live here. We have rights. Actually, you don't. The confidence in my voice surprised even me. I spoke to my attorney this morning. The deed includes reversion clauses. If the original agreement is violated, ownership returns to me. Color drained from Haley's face as the reality sank in. No more free ride. No more unearned comfort. No more mistaking generosity for obligation. You're bluffing, Cain stepped closer. His body language changed, tense, dangerous. You're just mad about yesterday. I'm absolutely serious, I replied. You have 30 days to move out. 30 days, he barked. Do you have any clue how expensive rent is right now? Where are we supposed to go? That's not something I'm concerned with anymore. I stood my ground, even as my surgical sight began to throb under the stress. You made it very clear yesterday, and again today, that caring for me is too much to ask. So I'm doing you the favor of relieving that burden. Haley moved between us, desperation overtaking her anger. Dad, please, let's talk this through. We were just overwhelmed. We can fix this. It's too late for that, I said flatly. You're not going to just force us out. Cain's voice bounced off the walls. He stepped in front of me, blocking the hallway. This is insane. You can't just make threats and toss us out like it's nothing. But I can, I replied, staring him down. And I will. His expression twisted into something darker. Haley grabbed my arm, holding tighter than she needed to. You're not thinking clearly. You're still recovering. You're emotional. No, Aid trying to move past her, but Cain stepped into my path again. Where do you think you're going? To my bedroom. I need to call my lawyer. No, you're not. Cain reached into my shirt pocket and pulled out my phone before I could stop him. You're going to sit down and talk this out like an adult. My heart pounded, reminding me that I wasn't physically ready for this kind of confrontation. Give me my phone. Not until you calm down. Haley came to stand beside him. That's when it hit me. They were coordinating this. Not trying to de-escalate, but to control the situation, to corner me. This is absurd, I said, beginning to feel trapped. Can't what? Cain interrupted. Can't stop you from hurting yourself and everyone else with these crazy ideas. They turned me around, leading me gently but forcefully toward my room. I didn't resist, knowing I couldn't outfight them in my current state. But I also knew this was a mistake they wouldn't recover from. You're making a very serious error, I warned. The only mistake, Haley said, pushing open the door to my room, is letting this go on too long. Cain slid my phone into his pocket and nodded. We'll revisit this when you're thinking straight. The door shut behind me with a quiet click. Then came the sound that confirmed it. They locked it from the outside. Half an hour of turning the knob, pressing my ear to the frame, and inspecting the window confirmed what I feared. I was locked in completely. The handle wouldn't budge, and although the window could open, it overlooked a straight drop of 15 feet onto concrete. There was no way I could make that in my condition. Still, the window offered something better, a lifeline. Across the fence, in the adjacent backyard, stood Joshua Palmer. He was coiling a garden hose, winding it over his shoulder like he'd done 100 times before. He had lived next door for about 3 years now. Friendly guy. We exchanged nods and polite conversations by the mailbox, nothing more, but I was counting on that simple civility now. I pushed the window open wide and leaned forward, positioning myself just enough for him to see me clearly. "Joshua, I need help," I called out. His head snapped up immediately. His eyes found mine in seconds, and his face shifted from curiosity to alarm. "Peter, what's going on?" He stepped closer to the fence, concern deepening with each step. "I need you to call the police," I said. The words felt foreign, heavy, but this had gone far beyond anything a family should ever endure. "They locked me in my room. They took my phone. I can't get out." Joshua blinked, stunned. "Wait, are you hurt? Do I need to call for an ambulance too?" "No ambulance," I replied quickly. "I'm healing from heart surgery, but I'm okay right now. I just need the police. They're using my condition to control me." To his credit, Joshua didn't hesitate. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out his phone. "Hang on, I'm calling now." Relief washed over me as he dialed. 911, what's your emergency? I could hear the dispatcher's voice crackling through the speaker. "I need officers sent to 4715 Maple Street," Joshua said, glancing back at me for confirmation. "It's a domestic situation. Elderly man, post-surgery, being confined against his will by family." He relayed everything I told him: my recent heart surgery, the door locked from the outside, my phone taken. The dispatcher asked a few follow-up questions, and Joshua echoed them to me, then relayed my answers. How long I'd been locked in, whether I felt in immediate danger, whether anyone was armed. No, just control. Just silence and indifference turned into strategy. "Officers are on their way," the dispatcher finally said. "Estimated time, 8 to 10 minutes. Joshua ended the call and looked back up at me. "They're coming, Peter. Should I wait out here?" "Yes, please, and thank you. I know this is not normal." "Don't even think about that," he said firmly. "You did the right thing." He stood near the fence like a watchful sentry. "Anything you want me to tell them when they get here?" I thought for a moment, listening through the door to the low murmur of voices in the house. Haley and Cain were talking, relaxed, as if nothing had happened, as if I were just sulking in my room instead of being held there. "Yes," I said. "Tell them it's a property matter, too. They're trying to stop me from asserting my legal rights as the rightful owner of the house." Joshua nodded, absorbing that like the responsible man I always suspected he was. "Got it. Property dispute. Unlawful confinement. Elderly homeowner post-op. I'll make it clear." In the distance, I heard a car engine hum. It felt early, but my pulse jumped anyway. "They'll be here soon," Joshua called out. From the hallway came the sound of fast steps. I stepped back from the window and positioned myself just beside the door. I needed to be listening now. T. Emang was everything. The lock clicked. The door swung open. Haley stood there with a look that could have won her a trophy, worried, confused, loving. "Dad," she asked sweetly, "are you okay? You seemed so upset earlier." She looked as if she'd found me mid-breakdown, not minutes after locking me away. It was the performance of someone who had planned her entrance carefully. "The police are here," I said, brushing past her into the hallway. Her head tilted and her brows creased with performative concern. "Police? Why would they be here?" Kayan stepped out from the living room, hands raised slightly, expression pure confusion. Did something happen? Before I could answer, the doorbell rang. Haley jumped slightly and placed a hand gently on my arm. "Let me get that," she offered, guiding me like a caring nurse. She opened the door. Two officers stood there, early 30s maybe. One man, one woman. Both wore the calm expressions of people who had seen too many of these situations before. "Evening, I'm Officer Edward, and this is Officer K.H. Lowe," the man said. "We received a call about a family situation." "There must be a misunderstanding," Haley chirped, adopting that patient daughter tone. "We were just spending a quiet evening in. My father's been recovering from surgery, and we've been watching over him closely." I stepped forward, not wasting time. "I had to ask my neighbor to call you," I said. "They locked me in my room. They took my phone. I had no way to call for help." Officer K.H. Lowe's eyes flicked between all three of us, reading the room. "Can you walk us through what happened?" I nodded. "I told them earlier that I wanted them to leave the house. They didn't like that, so they physically pushed me into my bedroom and locked me inside." Haley gasped as if I'd just accused her of theft. "Dad, that's not how it happened. You were dizzy, confused. We helped you lie down. The door was never locked. You just had trouble with the knob." "It was absolutely locked," I said. Cain moved up beside her, folding his arms but keeping his tone gentle. "Mr. Richardson has been disoriented since the surgery. The doctor even warned us that he might have episodes of confusion. We're just trying to help him through it." Officer Edward pulled out a notepad. "When was the surgery?" "Monday," I replied. "But I'm thinking clearly now. I know what happened." "Dad," Haley interjected, her voice soft, full of patience. "You've been saying things all day that aren't quite accurate. You keep talking about us like we're strangers. But we're trying. We're doing our best." Officer K.H. Lowe scanned the room. It looked ordinary. Calm. No signs of a fight. No broken glass. Just a well-decorated living room filled with subtle lies. "Mr. Richardson, do you feel safe in this home?" she asked. "Not when they lock me in and take my phone," I replied. "We never took his phone," Haley said instantly. She reached into her pocket, held it up. "He left it on the counter. We were just charging it." She handed the phone to Officer Edward. He examined it and returned it to me. "Have you been on any post-op medications?" he asked. "Yes," I admitted, "but they don't affect my judgment. I know what's happening." The officers exchanged a look. "Has your father been showing other signs of memory loss or confusion?" Officer Edward asked. Haley sighed deeply, like the weight of caregiving was crushing her. He's been convinced we're trying to take over the house. He even accused us of abuse. It's been really hard. I only asked for water, I said, and they made it clear I was a burden. Haley turned to Officer K.H. Lowe. We just want to care for him. It's been overwhelming, but we're trying to follow the doctor's advice. He needs rest, some light movement, hydration. K.H. Lowe nodded slowly, jotting down notes. Mr. Richardson, do you remember what you told your neighbor? Yes, I asked him to call because they had confined me in that room. Haley cut in again. He just got confused. The door sometimes sticks. It's been like that for months. The officers looked at each other. It was subtle, but it told me what I needed to know. They weren't buying it, but they weren't ready to act on it either. Sounds like there may be some misunderstanding due to recent surgery and recovery challenges, Officer Edward finally said in a neutral tone. Mr. Richardson, we want to remind you that if at any point you feel threatened or unsafe, you're always within your rights to call us. But right now, we're not seeing enough evidence of a criminal issue. They stayed for another 10 minutes or so, asking routine questions, jotting down notes. But the decision had already been made the moment Haley handed over my phone and blamed everything on post-surgical confusion. Once the door closed behind the officers, the energy in the house shifted completely. Haley and Cain no longer needed to pretend. That, Cain said sharply, stepping forward, was a really stupid move. I said nothing. They locked me in my bedroom again. Only this time, they didn't stop at the door. They took everything, my documents, my phone, any means of communication or proof, everything that made me feel even remotely in control. I sat in that room for the next 90 minutes, staring at the walls, thinking, not panicking, thinking. Then I made a choice, one that my recovering body probably wasn't ready for. The window. It was the same one I'd stared through earlier. Now, it wasn't just an escape route. It was the only option I had left. 15 feet down to the ground. That's no big deal for a healthy man, but I wasn't that man anymore. I was less than a week out of heart surgery. One bad landing could rupture something vital. But staying locked in that room, treated like a delusional old man in the home I'd paid for, that was a worse fate. I opened the window all the way, squinting to assess the fall. Fortunately, there was a garden bed below, loose soil, soft enough to absorb the impact. It was something. From their bedroom, I could hear muffled laughter, the hum of their evening routine. TV on, jokes exchanged, takeout being unwrapped. They were confident now. They thought they'd shut the door on the problem. They had no idea. I'd just opened one. Climbing out took everything I had. Every shift of my weight sent shocks through my chest. That fresh surgical wound wasn't just sore, it was electric. But humiliation had burned hotter than pain. I swung one leg over, then the other, until I was sitting on the ledge like some exhausted old burglar planning a clumsy heist. I looked down. It seemed much farther than 15 feet. I had no gear, no way to ease the drop, no backup plan. But I had anger and desperation. I let go. The impact knocked the wind out of me. My back landed in the flower bed, sending soil flying. Pain exploded across my torso. For a moment, I couldn't even move, just lay there, wondering what I'd broken. But nothing vital seemed to be ruptured. I got to my knees, brushed off the dirt, and began creeping around the edge of the house like a thief in my own backyard. Every step had to be measured, quiet. There was a gravel path by the garage and a motion sensor I had installed years ago. I remembered where not to step. To them, this was home base. To me, it had become enemy territory. At the front door, I crouched and lifted the old welcome mat. My heart pounded, not just from effort, but hope. The spare key was still there. I'd placed it there 3 years ago, out of habit, not trust. Now it felt like destiny. My hand trembled slightly as I slid the key into the lock. I didn't know if it was adrenaline or relief. Click. The door opened smoothly, like it always had, like the house itself hadn't forgotten me. Inside, everything looked exactly the same, but it felt different now. Not like a home, not a prison, something else. A battleground. I moved through the entry hall, sticking to the shadows. Their voices echoed from the living room, talking about their weekend, their shopping plans. Normal conversation for people who thought they had won. The irony of it almost made me laugh. I didn't want a fight, not yet. What I needed were my papers, Michael's contact information, the original deed, the business card he left behind. All of it was in my bedroom, still intact, still accessible, assuming they hadn't gone through every drawer. The hallway stretched in front of me like a quiet path towards something that mattered. Every footstep brought me closer to reclaiming control. Those documents weren't just ink and paper, they were proof. Proof that I wasn't confused. Proof that I wasn't powerless. Just temporarily outmaneuvered. With them in hand, I knew what came next. The rules of the game had changed. And now I was playing to win. The following morning, I climbed out that same window again. Only this time, it wasn't desperation driving me. It was purpose. I arrived at Michael's office before 8. The polished wood floors and leather-bound books felt like an anchor, a reminder that this wasn't chaos anymore. This was a process. Michael had agreed to meet early, sacrificing his Sunday without hesitation. When I walked in, he noticed the exhaustion written all over me. "Mr. Richardson," he said gently, pouring coffee from his thermos. "You look like you've been through a war." "I have," I said, "and I need to win it." He gestured for me to sit. "Tell me everything." So I did. I recounted the entire night. The second lock-in, the police visit that went sideways, how they used my medical condition to discredit me, how they took everything and left me with nothing but silence. Michael listened quietly, taking notes with a focused intensity that made me feel heard in a way I hadn't for days. "They locked you in again?" he asked, his tone now laced with quiet fury. "Yes, and they kept my phone. I had to climb out the window." His expression changed, no longer just professional, but personally outraged. "That changes everything." He pulled out the folder we'd worked on the day before, laid it across his desk like a blueprint for a campaign. "We're no longer discussing options," he said, flipping through the papers. "We're initiating immediate action." He opened his laptop and began typing rapidly. "You're pursuing full revocation of the gift deed. No more waiting. The law is on your side, and the clock starts now." I watched as he crafted the document like a man building armor. In Washington, case law is clear. If a recipient of a conditional gift shows cruelty, hostility, or violates terms related to care or housing, the gift can be rescinded. It felt like music, the kind of clarity I hadn't felt since before the surgery. "What does the actual process look like?" I asked. "First," he explained, "we issue a formal notice of revocation. This outlines every violation, verbal mistreatment, neglect, confinement, and their complete disregard for your recovery. Then, then we serve them," he said flatly. "They'll have 30 days to vacate." He was already scanning precedent cases, legal templates, and finalizing the notice as he spoke. "And if they resist, then we pursue legal action for unlawful possession, and you have every ground to do so." He stopped for a moment and looked directly at me. "Do you want to deliver this yourself?" "No," I said quickly. "Not after last night." He nodded. "Then I'll hire a professional server to handle it tomorrow morning." The legal language felt like a shield. Every word was carefully placed, devoid of emotion, but carrying the weight of justice. What if they try to fight it in court? Michael leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled in the way experienced lawyers do. "They can try," he said, "but they'd have to prove they treated you reasonably and that they honored the conditions of the gift. From what you've described, they don't stand a chance." His confidence was steady and reassuring. "And if they try to use the police report from last night?" I asked. "That would actually help us," he replied. "They claimed you were confused due to surgery and dismissed your complaints. That's manipulation based on your medical vulnerability. It supports a claim of elder abuse." It was poetic. The very tactic they used to discredit me was now the nail in their legal coffin. "How long until this is over?" "If they don't contest," Michael said, sealing the documents in an official envelope, "you'll have full possession restored in about 60 days. I exhaled, finally feeling what I hadn't since the first water request: hope. "But," he added, "the psychological shift will be immediate. Once they receive this, they'll know their control was never real." Standing up, I took the envelope in both hands. It felt heavier than its physical weight, like the restoration of my dignity. "Michael," I said, "I can't thank you enough." "Don't thank me yet," he replied with a half-smile. "You're about to teach them a lesson most people never forget." I left the office feeling like a man who'd finally found his footing. I wasn't a burden. I wasn't confused. I wasn't trapped. I was a homeowner, and they were about to remember exactly who I was. Monday morning came with the kind of certainty that only legal paperwork can provide. In my hands, I held the formal revocation documents Michael had prepared. each page stamped with authority, every paragraph constructed to reclaim what was rightfully mine. Haley was in the kitchen, casually making coffee. She moved like someone entirely at home, completely unaware that her time here was ticking away. Cain was seated at the dining table, glued to his phone. It looked like any normal morning. But it was. "Haley, Cain," I called, stepping into the living room. "Can you both come in here, please?" My tone was different, not soft or unsure like before. I sounded like a man with leverage, and they noticed it immediately. Haley's face twisted slightly, as if annoyed at the interruption. Cain barely glanced up at first. They had no idea. I raised the envelope so they could see the letterhead, the signatures, the formatting. "These are official eviction documents," I said. "You have 72 hours to vacate this house. Take your things, leave." For a moment, silence filled the room. Real silence, the kind that drops like a curtain after a final act. Haley's coffee cup froze halfway to her mouth. Cain lowered his phone without even realizing it. "What?" Haley finally asked, her voice hollow. "You heard me," I said. "This home, my home, was given to you under certain expectations. You violated every single one." I opened the first page and began reading aloud. "This notice of gift revocation is issued pursuant to state law, citing material breach of agreed familial responsibilities, emotional mistreatment, and failure to provide car. Ray to the grantor during medical recovery." Cain stood abruptly, his face flushed. "This is crazy. We live here. You can't do this." "You lived here because I allowed it," I replied. "And you lost that right the moment you treated me like an obligation instead of a father." I continued reading. Deliberate acts of confinement, neglect, and emotional cruelty, resulting in immediate legal action and 72-hour notice to vacate. Haley's hands trembled as she lowered her coffee mug. "You actually went to a lawyer." "Not just any lawyer," I replied. "The same one who handled the deed transfer 5 years ago. He was very interested to hear how I've been treated." "Dad, wait, please." Haley's voice cracked. It was the first time she'd looked genuinely shaken. "We know we've been unfair, but we can fix this. We can change." I folded the papers back into their envelope. "You have 72 hours." Cain moved toward me, his posture shifting into something almost confrontational. "After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us." "Everything you've done for me?" I asked, astonished. "You locked me in a room. You lied to police. You told them I was mentally unstable." "We let you live here," Haley blurted. I walked to the coffee table and placed the envelope down firmly. "You let me live in the home I purchased, with my money, with the proceeds from your mother's life insurance." The room went completely still. "Do you even remember how I bought this house?" I asked. Haley stared at me, eyes red-rimmed. "You used savings from your construction business." "Only partly," I said. "The down payment came from your mother's life insurance, $350,000 she left behind, so you would be secure." They said nothing. I opened a manila folder I'd brought from my room and laid out the documents: death certificates, claim forms, Insurance disbursement paperwork. She spent 20 years paying into that policy. She told me in her final days that this house should protect us, keep us together. Haley's face was pale now. Her mouth opened, but no words came. I never told you this before, I said, because I didn't want you living under guilt. I wanted this house to feel like a gift, not a reminder of what we lost. Haley touched the papers with shaking hands. I didn't know. No, I said. You didn't, because I wanted you to feel like it came from me, not from grief. Cain leaned over to look at the documents. Why now? Why tell us this? Because now you understand what you've done, I said, my voice steady. You turned the house your mother sacrificed for into a place of cruelty and entitlement. Haley broke down then, not just tears, but real grief. She'd be devastated, I continued, to know her legacy was used to isolate and diminish the man she loved. Haley looked at me through tears. Dad, I'm sorry. I didn't understand. And now, I said, you do. The weight of truth hung in the room like storm clouds. What can we do to make it right? She whispered. I looked at both of them, at the people they were now, finally stripped of arrogance, of certainty. You have 44 hours left, I replied. Use them wisely. By Thursday afternoon, the sound of packing tape echoed through the house. Cardboard boxes lined the entryway. Furniture scraped across the floors as they prepared to leave. Gone were the jokes, the shopping trips, the eye rolls. Now there was only silence and movement, the kind that comes from people who know they've lost everything. Haley walked down the stairs with a suitcase in one hand and the last of her dignity in the other. That's the last of our things, she said softly. I nodded, nothing left to say, not after what had already been said Tuesday afternoon. The keys sat on the coffee table, still attached to the keychain she'd bought 5 years ago when I gave her the house. It read, Home Sweet Home. The irony didn't need pointing out. Dad, she said, stepping carefully toward me, I need you to know I understand. I really do. I looked into her eyes, no malice there anymore, just shame, and maybe something close to growth. I know you do, I said. Cain appeared at the front door, keys in hand. We're ready. Haley picked up the house keys, turning them over in her hand. When she passed them to me, her fingers shook. These always belonged to you, she whispered. I nodded slowly. They did. This place, it was Mom's gift to us, wasn't it? She asked. Yes, and she would have expected you to treat it, and me, with respect. Cain stepped forward and extended his hand. Mr. Richardson, I take full responsibility. I was part of the problem. I failed you too. I shook his hand briefly. Now you understand what it feels like to lose a home. They walked toward the door slowly. Haley paused and looked back one last time. Will you ever forgive us? She asked. That's not the question, I said. The question is, will you remember this the next time someone needs kindness? The door closed behind them with a soft finality. Through the window, I watched them pack the last of their belongings into the car. No shouting, no pleading, just quiet acceptance. For the first time in days, The house was still. And for the first time in years, it felt like mine again. I glanced down at the keys in my hand, then at the insurance papers still resting on the coffee table. Sarah would have been proud. Her sacrifice had been honored, her husband protected, her home reclaimed. I walked through the rooms one by one. This was no longer a battlefield, or a prison, or a performance. It was peace. The kind that comes from standing up for yourself and for the promises made to those who loved you. Outside, the sun was setting gently, warming the earth and windows alike. I was home. If this story moved you, like, share, and subscribe for more powerful tales that stay with you long after.